from Book to Business. I'm Trina Boice, an author of 30 books and an author coach that helps writers become best-selling authors. And today I have a wonderful guest who's going to provide some really helpful insights for authors because she interviews authors. My guest today is Melissa Dalton Martinez. Welcome.
Hello, thank you.
And be sure and subscribe, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, before I forget, to this channel that you're already on. But Melissa,
Subscribe.
Tell us where everybody can find you. And we're going to talk about your show in just a minute.
Okay, so they can go to my website, which is thebookbreak.com, and I'm also on YouTube on The Book Break. So pretty easy to find, but make sure you use the word "the" because it's really important. It might pull up a different show if you don't, but mine's better.
Of course it is. Absolutely. So Melissa is a host of a TV miniseries called The Book Break, obviously. Tell us all about it and how you got started while interviewing authors. Tell us all about that.
So I actually started working in the publishing and film world in 2000. I started working doing PR for the movie God's Army, which if you guys never heard of it before, it was the very first movie that was specifically made for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and it was put out by Excel Entertainment through Richard Dutcher. So that's where I started in this industry, and then I worked in publishing as a PR and marketing person for publishers directly as an independent contractor since then. So a long time. And about a year and a half ago, I have a friend named Tony Toscano who is awesome, and he has a channel on Roku, and he talked to me about hosting a show called The Book Break, although we had 5 different names for it. I mean, actually, I'm sure we went through a ton of names, and the whole concept of the show changed for months before we finally jumped in. And I co-produce it with Mario DeAngelis, and he's awesome. I started working with him in 2018. So the first time Mario and I ever did anything was in September 2018.
Wow. And so how do you choose which authors that you're going to interview? Because I've seen you like at FanX and you're just randomly going up to people. Well, not randomly, but you're live and you're going up to people. And then I've seen you sitting and having guests. And so how do you put all that together?
So it depends on where I am. I have right now, I think we have out 44 episodes. Wow. And we already have filmed another 10 that are already done. And then we continuously film. So I try to hit all different genres, and if there's an event going on, like you mentioned, FanX, I will go and talk to multiple authors, and I try to get a variety. So I really like talking to New York Times bestselling authors as well as new authors, because I have been new, and I have people that I am friends with that are new, as well as New York Times bestsellers. And I think it's really important for authors to see that you can go from beginning to New York Times bestselling author, and everyone has something to offer.
I love that, because everybody wants to interview a New York Times bestselling author.
Yeah.
You're right. The newbies, people just sort of dismiss them. So what advice would you have for a new author who's trying to make it big, especially as you interview the best-selling authors? How do they fill that gap? What does it take to become this best-selling author?
So I think it takes a lot of hard work, for one. So one of the things is, so in addition to this show, I also do book reviews for people. And so I get books sent to me from Disney or from someone that just published it themselves. And I've been lucky enough to connect with some big publishers that send me authors like Rick Riordan. I've interviewed him, David Baldacci, some of these big guys.
Wow.
And I also am married to an author, so I see a lot of the back end, and then having worked in publishing, and I still do marketing for authors too. So the biggest thing is you have to be consistent, and that's difficult for some folks, and you have to do marketing. Like, there's no way around it. You have to do marketing. And even New York Times bestselling authors will tell you, you have to do marketing, and you can't leave it all up to your publisher either. Whether you are self-published or you're published with the big five, you have to do marketing. So from the author side, I see what my husband does, and he is very specific in how he writes. So he doesn't just write anything and then throw it out to somebody. Like, he thinks about it. He is consistently writing. He does his own, like, sit down and write. He does sometimes outlining. He writes in acts and things that I don't even understand because I'm not a writer. But I think that consistency is so important.
And you mentioned to me earlier that that blackboard behind you is where he normally does his storyboarding.
So yeah, this board behind me is a chalkboard wall, and my children have actually taken it over. So right now there's kid drawings back there. But yeah, so there's sometimes, like, when you want to sit down and you want to visualize something, and that's one way you can do it is through storyboarding, outlining, seeing it up in front of you. So if you've ever worked in film, there's storyboarding in film too. And it's useful, not just in film, but also in books. And I know for me, I look for something that I can see in my head. So if I'm reading a book, if it's well written, then I can see it in my head. And I'm a very visual person, so I think that's important.
Right. And I think a lot of times we think of storyboarding for fiction, for stories, but I use it for, I don't have an awesome chalkboard like that, but I use storyboarding for all of my nonfiction books. And some people don't have the luxury of having this awesome walled chalkboard. So I'll do like sticky notes, on a wall. So I can kind of see plot points where I'm going, because I'm a visual learner too. And I think it's a really good tip. You also mentioned the importance of marketing, and so many authors I talk to say, but I want to just write. Because back in the day, an author could hand the book over to the publisher, and the publisher would do all the magical marketing. But that's not really the case anymore, especially if you're self-published. But even if you are published with the big five, like you said, authors are still having to do a certain amount of creating a platform, creating visibility, getting that voice out there.
Yeah, and I think a lot of authors that are new, they don't know what kinds of marketing is out there. So for example, everyone's like, oh, social media, I need to be on social media. Yes, you do, but there are other things besides social media. So for example, BookBub, that's huge. And so many people have never even heard of BookBub before. Or Goodreads, that's another thing, making sure that your book is out there on Goodreads. And finding other opportunities to get your name out there, like being on a show, for example. That's one of the things that I do too, is I work with the media a lot. And so I can give you some tips in working with the media that I think a lot of people don't follow. And from being on both ends of the media, I can tell you it's really important. So for example, I'll have an author say they want to be on my show, or they'll want me to feature them in a book review that I'm doing on another show. And so what happens is they'll email me or send me a Facebook message, and they'll say, hey, Melissa, I have a book. I'd love to be on your show. That's the end. So the reality is that doesn't do it. You need to make someone work as little as possible. So if you want to get on a show, if you want to be in a magazine, if you want to be in a paper, anything like that, you need to provide as much of the information for that producer or editor. So for example, I don't want to hear I have a book, because as most people know, there's over 1 million books published every single year. So what makes your book different? What is your story about that's going to intrigue me? So for example, if you have a fiction or a nonfiction book, it can have anything to do with you personally or the book. So there's one author that I've worked with, and she has a fantasy middle grade book out, but her story for her personally is that she wrote that book with her autistic grandson, and he was 14 years old. And they originally did it as a summer project. Like, it was just, she didn't want him to just go down into the basement and play video games all summer. So for a project, they decided to write a story together. And he thought of a boy that was playing video games all the time, just like him, and was sucked into the video game. And then he found out that being in that world is a lot different than playing it on a game. And of course, that is a story that is common, but the way they did it is different. And then they're donating a portion of their proceeds to help build a foundation to help autistic families, either the family member or the child. And like, when Elizabeth Densley is one of the authors, and her grandson DJ. And when I first heard her story, I wanted to help her because it's a great story. So that is more of the story to me than the fact that a new middle grade fantasy book is out.
Absolutely. That's such a fantastic example. And really, it's a principle of marketing for any business. It's not just for authors, but people love stories. And like you said, it sucked you in and you wanted to see them be successful.
Yeah.
So that's such a great tip. I'm so glad you mentioned that beyond the actual story of the book, what is the story that you're presenting that's new and fresh and intriguing? Fantastic tip.
Yeah, and one other thing that people can do is they can write out, like if you're trying to go on a show, sample interview questions. That's another thing that you can give people, different topics. So if I'm pitching a media person, I am also looking at what's going on in the environment. So is there a holiday? Well, Valentine's Day is a holiday we all know about, but is there an obscure holiday? Like, did you know that in January there's a day called Dragon's Day? So if you have a book about dragons, you should try to pitch them about your book for Dragon's Day. So I mean, there's a whole list. You can go and look up holidays, and there is a holiday every single day of the year, multiple holidays. There's holiday weeks, there's holiday months. I mean, there's so much you can play off of. So my favorite author that I ever interviewed was James A. Owen, or James Artemis Owen. And if you're not familiar with James, he is a fantasy writer. He also is an inspirational writer. He's one of the, New York Times bestsellers. He's at all the Comic-Cons. He's a speaker and a wonderful speaker. And I met James 3 years ago at a conference called the Superstars Writing Conference. And I became a fangirl. Like, I don't get fangirl tongue-tied with anyone. I mean, I grew up, I'm kind of a little bit stereotypical in the sense that I'm from Southern California. I worked in the movies. I was around celebrities all the time. So celebrities really don't faze me. And then immediately I started working in publishing, and then I started working with authors right out of college. So, but I did with James. So the first time I went to interview him, I was so nervous. I mean, I was literally shaking because I was so nervous. And anyone that's ever met James knows he's the kindest, most laid back, humble guy. And so I was his fangirl and then I horribly messed up that interview. I did so bad that when Mario showed it back to me later, I was like, we cannot use that. That is bad. Like, I was just seriously like, turn it off. So then I interviewed him like 6 months later at this conference again. I went the following year. And then fast forward 6 months later, I was with my now husband, but at the time he was my boyfriend. We were unofficially engaged, not telling anybody yet. And he happens to be really great friends with James. And we ended up going to James's house for the 4th of July in Arizona. So I was just laughing, like a year and a half before that, I was so nervous I couldn't really ask him questions. And then here I was at his house for the 4th of July.
Chilling with your buddy. Yeah, that's so fun. I love that. So when you interview, how do you come up with questions? And well, second part of that question would be for an author who's getting ready to do an interview, what tips would you have to give a good interview or to answer questions well or to make it exciting? What are your tips?
Yeah. So honestly, I just learn about the author. I look up who they are. I look at their last book. I personally research the author before I interview them, and I do it on the fly. Like that doesn't work for everybody, but that's how I do it. I just try to play off of the person, and I do research them first though, because I've had times where I was getting ready to interview someone and I didn't know anything about them, and it didn't go very well. Another example of that, actually, I've interviewed my husband before he was my husband. In fact, we were just barely friends. Like, I didn't even know him that well. We were just barely
Wow.
friends, and I didn't know anything about him. So I tried to look him up ahead of time, but I didn't really have enough time to, and that interview didn't go very well either, and I never aired it. So
Oh, well, now I'm thinking you could probably get another interview with that guy.
yeah, I might be able to. My number one tip for authors, if you are fantasy, adventure, sci-fi, anywhere, even mysteries, thriller, suspense, my number one tip for you is go to the Superstars Writing Conference in Colorado Springs, Colorado. It is superstarswritingseminars.com, and it is the absolute best conference you'll ever go to.
Wow.
It's phenomenal, and no matter where you are in your writing career, whether you're just starting, in the middle, or the New York Times bestseller, you will learn something there. You will also meet incredible people. Networking is amazing.
I want to go. I haven't been. And by the way, Melissa and I are both going to be speaking at the 2020 LDS conference.
Yes. That's where I met you originally.
Yeah.
Was there, right?
Yeah. So as a non-author, what is it you're looking for as a reviewer? Because you review books. So tell me, are you looking for plot, character development, or just like you said, if you could see it? What is it you look for when you write reviews of books?
So I have worked with editors and everything all around, but when I am doing a book review, I am doing it as a reader, because when you have somebody, just the general public, reading your book, they may not be looking for all the little details that someone that works in publishing does. So I want a book that holds my interest from beginning to end. I don't like it to be too cliche. That is just my own opinion. I think some cliches are just normal because some cliches happen in real life. So I also like it to be something that I can visualize in my head, and it depends what I'm reading for. So I pretty much like all genres, except I'm not huge into horror. Like mild stuff I can handle, but too much of it, I get nightmares. But I love inspirational, and it can be inspirational in different ways. So it can be like a book that I just started reading right now. It's inspirational, but it's also kind of scary and suspenseful because it's the true story of someone who went to Mexico on a business trip and was kidnapped by the Mexican cartel, and he survived. And so it's an inspirational story of how he relied on God to get him through it and how he was rescued. So that's an inspirational book, but it holds me on the edge. I really like to listen to books too. So on that, if you get your book done in an audiobook, please pick a good narrator, please. I have a little pet peeve, I'll tell you as a reviewer. I really don't like it when narrators say the author's name wrong. So you would be surprised how often that happens. And I'm not talking just like self-published. I heard it recently on a Big 5 book. So yeah, it's saying that. But yeah, definitely a character I can relate to as well.
Right. And you know, I review movies and people ask me, are you looking for structure and principles of good filmmaking? Yes. However, I'm also reviewing it at, like you said, just
Hmm.
as a fan, does it hold my interest and, you know, all the things that you just said. But you also said something that some people in our audience might not know. And you keep mentioning Big Five. Tell us who the Big Five is and why
Okay.
they are the big goal of every author.
So the big five are the top five publishers basically in the world. They sell the most volume and they have the majority of their authors are New York Times bestselling authors. Eventually, obviously, if they're brand new, they may not be yet, but they have big. So Simon and Schuster, Harper Collins, those are ones that we're all pretty familiar with. And then Hatchet is another, and you have Tor, and I am just drawing a blank on the other one right now.
Did you say Random House,
Random
Penguin?
House. Thank you. Random House. So yeah, and they all have different names. Like some of them have smaller brands attached to them too.
Right, true.
So whether it's Simon and Schuster, just Simon and Schuster, or it's one of their off brands. Same thing with HarperCollins. They have different offshoots as well that are under their umbrella.
Right, which is a great place to get started. I mean, if you can get your foot in the door,
Yeah.
that's great. So a lot of authors want to send query letters or get a literary agent who's only focused on those big five, but you've got to start somewhere. So like I said, if you
Yeah.
can get your foot in the door, submit to other people besides just those big five, because they get bazillions of queries every day, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And you have to be patient too. So one of the things that I talk to authors about is people that are trying to query agents. You do have to have an agent if you want to get into any of the big publishers. I mean, there's a lot of big publishers. You have to have an agent. So one of the companies that I work with is called Eschler Editing. And I highly recommend them if you are interested in trying to get an agent or publish the book yourself. Please get an editor, even if you're talking about your query letter, your book, anything. And there's 5 different kinds of editing, and a lot of people don't realize that. When they think editing, they think a copy editor, someone that's looking for grammar or spelling, and that's not the only type of editor.
Tell us the other types.
So you have developmental editing, obviously you have line editing, copy editing. You have, see, this is funny. I'm not an editor, so I never remember all of them. But if you go to eschlerediting.com, it can tell you all of them. Isn't that funny? Like you want to make sure that your content is right. So like, for example, I know people that write books that happen in other countries. And you want to make sure you know your history of that country so that you're not saying something happened at a certain time in history where that wouldn't have worked. So anyways, stuff like that.
No, that's true. I mean, you're right. I think most people think editing, it's some grammar Nazi who's looking line by line for all the misspelled words or sentence fragments or whatever. But a really good editor can also look at the structure and say, no, this whole chapter needs to be here, or this character needs to go there. I mean, and again, I'm not a fiction author, but a really good editor is so valuable. And I recommend them too. They're
Yeah.
fantastic. Yeah.
And I think another thing is if you are self-publishing, there are certain things that you're going to need, like, for example, a cover. Please get a professional designer to do your cover. I will say that is something that I do look at when I review books. I look at the cover because if it's a bad cover, to me, that is telling me the story's not going to be that well done. Because honestly, if you don't put the effort into your cover, are you putting the effort into the book? Because books are judged by their cover.
Absolutely. And that's where that cliche comes from, right? That
Mm-hmm.
quote. Yeah, absolutely. Are there colors that you think are more attention grabbing, or what would be your style suggestions for authors who might be self-publishing?
So it depends on your genre. One of the things that you want to think about is if you're self-publishing, most likely the majority of your sales are going to be online. And so the very first thing I tell authors to do, and I do marketing consults with authors all the time, and so I say you need to go and look at what else is out there And you need to know who your competition is. I think
Right.
that's something that a lot of people, I get this all the time. So I send out my clients marketing questionnaires, and I ask them in the questionnaire to tell me who their competition is. And you would be surprised that 75% of the time, they tell me there's nobody with a book like theirs. Unfortunately, there is someone with a book like yours. So if you aren't willing to do the research to see what else is out there, then you're shooting yourself in the foot, essentially, because you need to be able to see what's doing well, what's not doing well, and why is it doing well. So colors, it depends on the genre, honestly. So like romance, for example, almost always you're going to see a person on a romance cover. If there's not a person on the romance cover, and it can be a silhouette of a person, it can be a side, it can be their hair flowing, it can be so many different things, but there needs to be a person on that cover. War covers are usually like soft, it depends. It's like a softer historical tone. If you do, like, this is funny. So my desk is next to me. I'm going to reach over. This happens to be a book. It's so backwards in this, huh? I just noticed that. But anyways, it's called Human Connection. It's by Arthur F. Coombs, and I love it. And it is a fun cover. It's blue. Blue is a really good cover, color on
Wait a
cover.
minute. Arthur Coombs.
Yes, Arthur
Is that
F.
his picture on the back? I went to high school with Art Coombs.
This is his picture.
That's Art. Are you working with him?
I do work with Art, yeah. So
Oh,
do you know this Art?
Yes, I went to high school with him.
Oh, that is funny. So Art, did you know he's an author? Art is an author.
I did, actually.
And he's amazing.
Yes, he came to Vegas. He was doing some big launch and invited me to go to the hotel where they were doing the big launch party.
Oh, awesome.
And I had the flu and I couldn't go, and I was so disappointed.
Oh.
But my twin sister also lives here in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
So she went, and I would have loved to see. We've
Yeah.
connected on Facebook, but I need to interview him.
You
That's
do.
so
Art is brilliant. And I mean, he's such a laid back, humble guy. Like he's funny. He would make a really good interview. In fact, I'm going to be interviewing him soon too.
Yeah,
but he has a new book coming out the end of March 30th. And it's going to be his third book. And it's awesome. So it's called Hard Evil.
That's so funny. It's such a small world. Okay, so we were talking about, you said some really brilliant things. You were talking about how authors need to know who their competition is.
Yes.
And a lot of times we think of competition as, that's, I'm fighting against that person, but I always encourage my authors that I work with to get to know that author, because your audience is the same. You can do joint ventures and that benefit both books, both authors.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? Yeah, so it's really important to know who they are.
Yeah.
So anyway,
and that's one of the reasons why I love the Superstars Writing Conference, is because it's a tribe feeling. Everyone is there to help you.
That's
and
awesome. That's how it should be.
It is. And I think a lot of times too, people are afraid of making author friends for that reason you mentioned, like, oh, we're in competition. No, make friends. And so many people in the publishing world are very open to helping you and to promote you, and honestly, you'll find people that, like, I found authors I had never heard of before. And every time I go to a conference, I always meet authors I hadn't heard of before, and I want to go read their books. And I've been pleasantly surprised in finding authors that I just love that I wouldn't have known about otherwise had I not gone to that conference.
Yeah, great tip. All right, to wrap it up, I'm going to ask you one last question. Since you are an interviewer, what is one question that I didn't ask you that you wish that I had?
Oh, that's funny. I don't know. I think you did pretty good, Trina. One question that you asked me, well, I kind of mentioned this before. So if people are interested in working with me, then either for consulting or to have me review their books, be on my show, or I also review books sometimes on different TV shows on like NBC or different places. So if they're interested in that, they can contact me. My email is melissa@thebookbreak.com. And I can give them more information, and they can contact me through my website too, but that's my email. That's the best way to get a hold of me.
Okay, and also you are going to be on a TV show. I think you said the end of January. So tell us really quickly about that.
So the book break comes out every Monday. So you can watch it online in a lot of different places. But if you want to go to my YouTube channel, it's The Book Break on YouTube. You can watch it every Monday. I have new episodes, and then so I live in Utah, and in Utah the station is called KSL Channel 5, and there's a show called Studio 5 that comes on Monday through Friday at 11 a.m. And on January 30th, I'm going to be reviewing 3 books on that show. So if you want to check it out and see my reviews, you can do that there. And also, if you're interested in me reviewing your book for that show, then contact me and I'll tell you what I'm looking for.
Wow, that's great. Thank you for the invitation for everybody who's watching. I don't even know how you find time to read all of those books. I mean,
I do a lot of audio.
Well, for my movie reviews, I'm like in and out in 2 hours. And for a book, you must be a very fast reader.
So here's my secret. Audiobooks, and I turn the speed up to 1.5. And if I really need to get through books fast, 1.75. And I can still, in fact, I'm so used. It's funny because I'm so used to listening to books at a higher speed that now if I try to listen to it at a lower speed, I think there's something wrong with it. It just sounds so slow to me, so slow. In fact, I was listening to a book the other day with my husband in the car. We were driving, and I just told him, man, I do not like this narrator. He is just so slow. And he goes, oh, honey, that's because it's only on 1. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's right. And I had loved the narrator on another book, so once we turned the speed up, I realized same person, and I like him.
That's so funny. That's a good tip too. All right. So thank you all for spending a few minutes with us. And thank you, Melissa, especially for spending a few minutes with us. Be sure and subscribe to
The Book Break.
The Book Break YouTube channel. And then also stay here, thumbs up, ring the bell. You'll be notified every time we upload new videos, right? You guys know the drill. All right. Thank you so much, Melissa.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Bye for now.
Bye.